we have access on a daily basis to senior leaders and to, I guess, influential decision makers who can make changes in the hiring structure and what they're doing.
Over the last couple of years, we've made sure that as a business, our culture and the service that we offer is a representation of what we want to see in society. So we will be talking to these senior leaders about some of the challenges and getting into detail around some of the initiatives that have been successful and worked for them.
What we really would like to do is kind of normalise the conversation and get people comfortable with having conversations around diversity and inclusion.
Hi Nick, thanks for joining us today.
Hello, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So thanks for joining for the DEI Bucket List. Today we're talking about how inclusive leaders build happier organisations. I'll kick straight off, and obviously if you could tell us a bit about your career story so far and how you got into leadership, that would be great.
Absolutely. Very happy to do that. And I'm actually going to start the story going way back to the beginning. So just to give you some personal context around my professional development. So I'll go all the way back to 1972, the year I was born. Was born into a military family. My dad was an army officer, which meant I moved constantly as a kid. So I actually moved the first time when I was 6 weeks old. Lived in 16 houses before I was 16, and had the real privilege, particularly for someone born in the 70s, of living in 4 countries by the age of 7. So I sort of grew up with change being a constant, and also seeing the world as my oyster, I suppose. I sort of had this real sort of privilege of being exposed to these different cultures and just sort of thinking that was absolutely normal. A real highlight was for a couple of years between the age of 7 and 9. The family lived in Denmark, in Copenhagen in Denmark for a couple of years. I'm going to return to that later on. Anyway, I got to university in my teens, very focused on getting a career in politics. I studied political science, French, studied in Paris for a year, which was just a wonderful experience. And but by the time I graduated, I didn't really feel qualified to vote. And I'd spent 4 years studying politics. And I kind of thought I didn't want my career decided by people who weren't sort of making informed decisions when they were voting for a politician like me. And I have to say that was the first in quite a few times in my career where deciding not to do something has been as influential as deciding to do something. So there have been either opportunities I've not pursued, or indeed opportunities that have turned me down that have ended up being really formative. So I graduated in 1995, not really knowing what I wanted to do. So I figured I'd work in sales for a bit. I sold encyclopedias door to door in America back in the days when your biggest objection was persuading people that wanted to read books rather than use CD-ROMs. Can you imagine? A year or two before the internet had really sort of become anything like sort of mainstream. And I quite liked sales. I came back to London, worked as a travel agent for a year, sort of indulged my passion for travel through that channel, and then got a job on with a big food company called United Biscuits, who own, or at the time owned, McVitie's and KP Hula Hoops and other such snack brands, working in field sales for them. And my first year there was definitely the worst year of my career. It was really tough. I had a lot of, I would say, rough edges knocked off me working in field sales as I think quite an idealistic, sort of bright-eyed young graduate, working with some people who, let's say, had been around the block once or twice, and learned a lot from them. But it was, as I say, pretty tough going. And I kept going to the graduate team and suggesting ways they could improve the program. And eventually, the person leading the team, named Sandra Ventry, said to me, "Look, there's a position on the team. Why don't you think about a career in with us in HR?" And that was how I sort of fell into the world of HR and discovered, okay, this is where I'm meant to be. So spent 2 or 3 years with UB doing graduate recruitment for them. Really enjoyed the recruitment side. There wasn't much in-house to stay in recruitment, so ended up moving on and landing a job with Corn Ferry doing executive search. So went from entry level through to executive level. There, I think I really discovered the power of sponsorship. One of the senior partners there, Chris Van Summeren, who's a good friend to this day, sort of took me under his wing and really sort of both sort of taught me a lot, but also really advocated for me in the business and gave me a bit of a sort of platform there. So I learned a lot about building professional networks, all about the power of leveraging that community to identify the right candidate for searches and so on. Did that for about 4 years. Quite a big moment in my life when I turned 30. I suffered some quite big personal loss around the same time and kind of was asking myself what I wanted to do with my career and thought, no, it's time to switch. I'm done with recruitment. I'll go and do an MBA at London Business School. I'll get into something more commercial. I had a great time there between 2003, 2005, sort of figuring out, actually, I really liked HR best. I liked talent best and decided to sort of carve out a niche in this area. And when I graduated, landed a role with Google, setting up and running their technical graduate programs in EMEA. And by this time, I was 33, and I still hadn't had any kind of people leadership or people management experience in my career. So that fortunately, I was able to build a small team there, and I learned a lot the hard way about managing a team, because I was really sort of thrown in the deep end with a sort of all-consuming job, really having no understanding of how to manage performance, how to manage a team, how to delegate, how to plan, progress, and to track impacts and so on. And it was an amazing experience in many ways. It was a wonderful time to be at Google when the whole company really was seen to be this incredible force for good in the world and really accelerating at a very big pace. And also was learning a lot about the field of diversity, because that was the first time we started to think very deliberately about how can we bring more females into software engineering? How can we bring more Arabic speakers into the organization? Also, we could deliver a better product to the world. And really importantly, as a gay man, I discovered that there's an opportunity to set up an LGBT network in the European organization. It had existed in the US, but not in Europe. And so we ended up having a float at Europride in Madrid in 2007, which was this incredible sort of life-affirming experience, and it was a real opportunity. Not only was it great fun, incredible employee engagement through it, particularly when we presented it to thousands of people at the sales conference, but also really sort of connecting the brand into the local community in a way that is standard now, but was quite unusual then. So all these different ways, sort of picking up some lessons about leadership along the way. But I also burned out, and we'll come back to the topic of energy, but I sort of crashed and burned towards the end of my time there, and I'd overcommitted myself. I wasn't managing my team well. I wasn't managing my own energy well, and needed a bit of time out before I then joined Thomson Reuters, the information business, and I was with them for 9 years. Again, really benefited from sponsorship there. Dimitra Manis, who was running the talent team there when I joined, sort of really took a risk on me, because up until then I was a talent acquisition guy. She took me on board as a talent development person. I learned a lot through doing by working with technology and operations people across the organization in a range of talent management and talent development roles, always with diversity sort of bedded into that. A really great time with them. I stayed with TR for 9 years. Just a great place to work, very purpose driven, very values focused, really in business for the long term. Learned tons there, and I think particularly really learned how to lead and manage a team there. And we'll come back later to sort of highlights of leading a team, but really some real moments of happiness there. And then, but left there at the end of 2018, the company went through lots of changes, decided it was time to move on. I was talking to various recruiters about where next, which was indeed the first time we connected a few years ago now. And I kept telling people it's all about purpose. I know I want to be in a corporate role, I want to be in a talent leadership role, and I want to have a sort of international focus. But beyond that, it's about the purpose of the company. And then I got a call from a recruit in Copenhagen saying, well, will you come to this company that does renewable energy? Couldn't even pronounce its name. Ørsted, as we would say in English, or Ørsted, as a Dane would roughly say, is a company that's been going through this massive transformation from being all about fossil fuels to being all about renewable energy. And I have the privilege of setting up and running the talent agenda there. So it's an opportunity to almost build this from scratch. And again, it keeps coming along to this leadership piece about sort of being able to sort of influence and engage through others. So and I've been there for just over 2 years now, and it covers everything from bringing great people in through creating a talent magnet, building an inclusive team, and then growing and sharing our talent with a great team in place.
Amazing. I didn't realise how diverse your background was right from an early age, and for how many different places you've lived and things. That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, the fun thing is, as a kid, you don't think it's amazing. You just think this is life, right? You don't question it. And I think I mentioned the word privileged earlier. It really was a privilege, and it really influenced my sort of leadership journey, I would say, because I think it taught me to deal with change at a young age, and to lean into change and to see that as something to enjoy and to explore and so on and so forth. And of course, change can be destabilizing and frustrating and all sorts of other more challenging emotions, but it can be incredibly exciting and open up sort of huge opportunity as well. And also instilled a lifelong curiosity in the world around me as well. I've always sort of loved to travel, and I ascribe that to traveling from such a very young age.
Yeah, definitely. And I think obviously it does just make you probably think a lot broader than perhaps you wouldn't if you hadn't. But you also touched upon quite a few people there in your brief intro, so I imagine there's lots of people along the way. Who is it that influenced your leadership journey, and what did you learn from them?
Well, I think, I mentioned three people, Sandra, Chris, and Demetra, who all in different ways, took a risk in sort of bringing me into roles that I wasn't necessarily qualified for, but obviously spotted an ability to work across and managed to do that. And so I think this piece about sponsorship is so important. And of course, others have sponsored me during my career as well. But knowing that there are others out there who can advocate for you sort of day in, or sort of not necessarily day in, day out, but on a regular occasion through your corporate journey is so important. And also you can give you that sort of mentoring and that advice and that fairly sort of, I think both informed feedback, but also sort of at times that sort of the feedback you don't necessarily want to hear, but that advice that really can sort of push you forward and make you a better leader. I'm not going to name any names here, but arguably I've also learned more from the bad leaders. And let's just say, I won't name names, but I talked about, that tough job working in field sales. My manager then was, let's say old school, I think would be the sort of polite way to put it. Just had learned to manage in a very, very, very different world to the one in which we live now. It was out of date in the mid-90s, and it seems incredible now that someone could manage that way. But there have been others as well along the lines who, who have sort of perhaps ruled through political influence or through fear or through hierarchy, and I often advocate you learn as much from when things go wrong or when people do things they shouldn't do as you do from great managers who sort of really do support you and advocate for you.
100%. And obviously that's what we're here to talk about today in terms of inclusivity and how leading teams can build happier teams. So from your side, what would you see the connection being between inclusion and happiness?
Well, inclusion is fundamentally about a sense of belonging, and it's about being able to be yourself. And of course, it's when we are ourselves that we are typically happy, and arguably even at our happiest. So it's when we can turn up at work and not pretend, not try to impress, not try to be someone that we're not, and we can just show up and be us, that I would argue we let the barriers down, we relax, and we can engage with others at a personal level and be happy. And so I think it's so important, this point about feeling valued for who you are and feeling able to contribute in a way that resonates for you personally rather than what you feel you should be doing. And I have to say, I'm still somewhat surprised when I hear so many stories of really quite senior people who really have so much going for them in terms of great behaviors, great intellect, great experience, so much to contribute, and yet still they're trying to conform to a type around them, and they feel, and that's quite often I think that we put ourselves under pressure to do that. There's no one explicitly telling us to, but somehow we think we have to conform to this norm of what good and great is, and so therefore, and I would argue that gets in the way of us just relaxing and being ourselves. Let's also remember, it doesn't just support happiness, it also supports performance. And we tend to be happy when we're doing well. And there's the LGBT inclusion organisation Stonewall. I'm not sure if it's still its slogan, but for many years their sort of tagline was "People perform better when they can be themselves." And it's such a true point that when you can just turn up and be yourself, you tend to perform better, and that becomes self-perpetuating because you get confidence from the fact you're delivering. That makes you happy. That makes you feel, or helps you feel fulfilled, so on and so forth.
Exactly. And obviously that leads into what would your take be on happiness at work? Obviously you touched upon it there. Is there any particulars that you kind of bring into your teams that you want to talk about?
Well, it's cheesy, but you know what? Laughter makes a big difference.
Yes.
And particularly, acknowledging that, we do serious work, most of us, and that doesn't mean we're all going to be laughing the whole way through every meeting, but finding those moments just to inject a bit of fun and energy into meetings is so important, and arguably even more so when things are tough. And that's why I think, many of us have sort of found the last sort of 18 months or so of working at best in a very hybrid way, and for many people in an almost completely virtual way, has been quite challenging, because you don't find those little minutes for a bit of a giggle at the coffee machine or whatever else. So therefore, sort of building that into things like team meetings and so on is I think incredibly important. So I think it's about laughter, it's about good energy, but also I think it's about knowing each other and finding ways to sort of build that connection on a personal level. And that doesn't mean you're always telling your life story to everyone you meet. It doesn't mean that you're sort of revealing all these deep personal details, but it's just these little things about what makes you tick, about sort of being open about that with each other and finding ways to help us remind each other to make it tick, what makes us tick.
Absolutely. And obviously then that leads into, you just mentioned it there, from an energy perspective. I know that everyone struggled with that, especially during the pandemic, and it's obviously all been virtual, but how, from your side, why and how do you manage energy? And obviously, how does that lead into leading happier and more inclusive teams?
I manage energy because I know what happens if you don't.
Yeah.
And I talked a bit about my experience of that when I worked at Google. I also had it at a time sort of early on in my years working at Thomson Reuters, where I had a particularly challenging role, which was always going to be a sort of 12 months sort of secondment into a role. And I remember getting to the end of it, and my manager who succeeded Dimitra as my manager, another fantastic manager called Vera Vitels, I told her how exhausted I was at the end of the year, and she said, with a wry smile on her face, she said, developing is hard work, isn't it? And I was like, don't tell me these inconvenient things. But it was really true. I mean, it had been intensely developmental and also just really intense as well. And so I think it's so conscious that we realize that if we are going to contribute to our best effect, we have to really consciously manage our energy. And there's various ways that we can do that. We should think about the sleep that we're getting. Are we getting enough sleep? Are we getting high quality sleep? Do we create the conditions where that is possible? Acknowledging that is easier for some than others. And I say that as a non-parent who's often just been amazed at parents' ability to operate on minimum amounts of sleep. But are we getting the sleep we need? Are we hydrated? I mean, here I am drinking my glass of water, right? We need to make sure that we keep hydrated. Are we exercising as well? And how is our diet? So sort of thinking really deliberately about how we can manage these things, all these sort of different influences on our energy. I'm also a big believer, to the exercise point, about just moving. I remember earlier on this year when we was, every country was absolutely sort of locked down. And one of my team, Louisa, saying to me, you know what, it's just not natural for us to be sat down for so long. And, physiologically, we should be moving at least every half hour. And as a result of that conversation, I really try, even if it's for 10 seconds, to walk across the room and back between every half-hour meeting, just to try and move, because I believe that moving is so helpful. And even better, grab your phone and go take that Teams meeting, which is a town hall or whatever, as you walk around the park, or even just walk around the block. And there's, I think, few things more invigorating than a walking meeting. Final point is plan your holidays and take them. We're having quite a big discussion about that in my global talent team at the moment, to make sure that we really take the time of the summer holidays actually to refresh and really to cut ourselves off. And with one person making a very good point to me last week, that the moment you check an email, that's your head gone for the rest of the day. And I've had that on holidays before where I thought, I'll just have a quick check on my phone. And, and then I end up in a stupid correspondence I really don't need to be involved in, but that is suddenly taking away my, distracting me from my holiday. So I'm a great believer in really using holidays just to slow down and cut yourself off from work in as much as you possibly can.
Absolutely. I think people have struggled as well with obviously staycationing. And being in the same time zone, and you can't, it's just so much easier. You don't really have that disconnect.
And there's little things like I try to do this certainly on the weekends, but particularly if I'm taking time out, actually just to put away all your computer equipment, hopefully so it's actually out of sight, so mentally you're not even getting sort of triggered by it. And also, for instance, at the end of every day, I properly turn my computer off. And I do not go back on it. And it's usually a little bit later than probably I should and would like to and everything like that. But at least it does get sort of properly switched off.
Yeah. Amazing habit to get into.
And by the way, this is so important for leaders to do, not just because life as a leader is pretty intense. It's pretty relentless. It is for your teams as well, but it is relentless for a leader. But also we role model to our teams. And I've often had this when I've worked on a day when I've said I was going to be off. People mentioned it a couple of weeks later, oh, you didn't take that day off in the end. I was like, well, I did actually, but I just did that quick email or that quick call. It's like people notice these things, and they don't sometimes they might judge you for it, but they may not necessarily judge you for it, but they probably think that's what it takes to be impactful around here. So therefore, when I take time off, maybe I should just be a little bit plugged in. That's not a good lesson to be or not. It's not the idea. Let's put it more positively. There are better examples that you can set to those lead.
Absolutely. I think we are all probably we've all done that at some point. Sure. So leading us back into kind of the question around inclusion and obviously building happier teams, is there a connection between the personal authenticity of a leader and the level of inclusion in a team?
Absolutely. And let's come back to this point about the leader role modeling. People look to the leader for an example. And if a leader is open about who they are, what they bring, and also really importantly, where, they fall short on stuff, people relate to that and they feel able to do it themselves. And I'm often struck by, I have, when I tell my sort of career story and I bring personal details into it, and sometimes I'll talk quite a lot about sort of personal history and so on and so forth. I'm amazed by how much that resonates with people. And for me, it feels like quite a simple thing to share, but actually not many leaders do. And so often we see each other as just being this job title. Here's this person who's just been super, who's in an important role and is therefore very successful. And clearly they've just had this upward trajectory. They've never had a single doubt or a single problem along the way. Well, of course, we all know to call BS on that, right? But and no one deliberately says that. No one really thinks that. But that's the image we project. Unless we tell people, I did burn out, I did fail, I did get made redundant, I did, get bullied, whatever else. When leaders admit that these things have happened to them or own that these things have happened to them, it really sort of helps others understand this happens to everyone. And so therefore it leads into to the leader being more authentic and more themselves, and that permits other people to do that. And it all comes back to this point. Then people can relax and just get on and do the job rather than trying to impress people.
Absolutely. And I know that you're looking forward to this question, but why do you think serious leaders are taken so seriously? And is that a stereotype that we can potentially break? And if so, how?
Well, because life is serious, right? And the only way that you can deal with it is to be serious back. And, joking aside, it is intense. I mean, I've had feedback from people working for me that they've seen me be like super sunny and shiny and Mr. Energy and everything like that. They can also see me being very intense and going back to back and being quite sort of, driven to achieve big things and sort of focusing so much on that. And so, we can take ourselves quite seriously, which means that, we think other leaders need to take us, we need to be taken seriously to be a leader. But then I think you learn that actually you can have fun, you can have a good time along the way, and actually laughter being a special ingredient in meetings, good energy being something that actually people follow you for, that people want to get involved in your movement for is so key. And I always remember once that in a previous job, I'll sort of be a bit vague as well. I'll say it was at Thomson Reuters. I was well known for being very active. They had a very social intranet, and I had been involved in helping sort of establish the case for that and getting it up and running in the early days. And so I was very active there. I was sort of very visible through these internal social media channels. And I realized actually that quite a few leaders thought I was a bit lightweight as a result. So, you know, a serious leader wouldn't engage in an online discussion, would they? Because how could a serious leader have time to do that and an inclination to do that? And actually, someone basically asked me that once. It's like, oh, are you all about the social stuff? And, you know, the implication being, well, there can't be that much substance behind it because you're so visible on the social media that you must be spending your whole time doing that. And it's sort of, and the penny dropped for me there that, you know, people think sometimes there can be a trade-off there. And I think there is no trade-off between being good-humoured, bringing fun, bringing energy, and also getting a serious job done, having serious things to deliver. But it doesn't mean you can't have a bit of a smile and a bit of sort of being yourself along the way.
Yeah, and as you kind of mentioned the whole way through, obviously that's what your team and everybody around you is buying into. They're all going on that journey for that reason, because they feel obviously they know you on a level. I think if you're Mr. Serious or Mrs. Serious the whole time, it's sometimes you don't have that deeper connection. Obviously makes you feel a bit more engaged.
Yeah, and I guess it's one of those things, there's not necessarily any right or wrong to it, and people have to do, you know, it's ironic here, we're talking about authenticity. It's important that you're true to yourself. Yeah. And some people are happy being much more open about these things. Some people are more happy being lighthearted, or they feel more comfortable being serious. So there is a thing about sort of you know, being true to yourself. But I think that is a key point there as well. A lot of people who are being very serious about things, I think, are thinking that's what you need to do to be taken seriously by others. And I would contend that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah. Okay. That's really interesting. Thanks, Nick. What do you think the signs are of a happy team, and then also of an inclusive team?
Well, I've talked about laughter already. I think, you know, laughter in meetings is a good sign. I think sort of the body language and the verbal language that people use can tell that well. And the other one is, what's the reputation of the team? Is this a place that people want to work? Do people look to that team either with some, you know, admiration, or maybe even like a hint of aspiration that, you know, we could be like that too, is super important. So I think there are some sort of good indicators there. And of course, I suppose an obvious one is, I would contend there is a direct correlation between happiness and performance that I talked about, and there would be another sort of triangle, or another point on the triangle of being engaged as well. So you can probably actually find quantitative data around that. In terms of being inclusive, I think it's, I would say actually the most important one is this a diverse team in which is performing well? Because if it's a diverse team that performs well, then presumably other perspectives are being taken on board, and therefore it is inclusive. Yeah. And that doesn't mean it always has to be harmonious. And I think that's a real challenge here, is like, you know, most of us are people pleasers, most of us seek harmony. But actually, disagreement can be a sign of it's certainly a sign of a healthy team, so long as it's being handled appropriately, that people are able to bring different perspectives and to disagree with each other and so on. But then also that harmony can return once you've maybe had that bit of conflict as well. And I think figuring out how to handle that between individuals in a team and across a team is quite a challenge, but also distinctly possible.
Perfect, thank you. I think there's lots there that people will take away, and obviously some people might not necessarily have that natural inclination to understand whether that's kind of forming together or not. So from your side, how can you deliberately build inclusion and happiness in a team?
I think it starts with getting to know each other. And there are all sorts of different ways that you can do that, but it can be as simple as, I mean, I had a fairly new team that I came together with recently that I'm leading on an interim basis. And we just had, I think we ended up between 5 of us, we had 3 hours between us, and we just had 20 minutes each to share our personal story. And we very deliberately left it completely open. Share whatever you feel like sharing, go as deep and intimate as you want, or not, as you, whatever you feel comfortable with. But just help us learn a bit more about you, what's influenced you along the way, and maybe you can share a fun photo or two, or share a good music track. Just all these ways of sort of getting to know each other better can really sort of make can make a big difference. And then keeping that conversation going, because I think these things do take time to solidify, and that personal bond really can lead to so much else at a later basis. But the other thing is, and I forget whose model this is, I'm afraid, but there's high performing teams tend to have a high sense of trust, identity, and efficacy. And I really should know which model or whatever that is, but I stick with those three words. Do people trust each other? Do they have an ability to sort of speak their mind to each other and know that they will be heard for their true intent? Does the team know what it stands for? Does it have a sense of identity to itself and to the world around it? But the efficacy piece is really important, because otherwise it's just soft. But actually efficacy is all about, do we deliver stuff together? And that's why I'm a great believer that when you have a team being really conscious about the journey that you've been on, what we've delivered along the way, what that shows about us as a team, and what it shows about where we could go next, is so important.
Perfect. And do you think teams have to be happy all the time?
No. Absolutely not. And look, it's human nature. We'd all like to think that we could be happy all the time. And, you know, it's the old cliche, but you have to go deep into the valley so you can appreciate the view from the highest mountain, kind of thing. I think it was Richard Nixon said that when he resigned after Watergate, but there you go. But it is true that, you know, you have to deal with the lows in order to appreciate the highs. And that counts as a team as much as anything else. And the fact is, particularly as a leader, you have to make tough decisions. You have to do things that, you know, are difficult for those, you know, decisions maybe to make, and situations for you to handle, and that can really sort of push into some challenging moments. That's life. Exactly. And I think just to acknowledge that, you know, that's part of sort of going through, you know, through life, that you deal with the lows as well as the highs, does mean that you appreciate the happy moments all the more when you get there. And what I would also add is, you know, as much as you can, try and make sure the highs outweighs the lows, right? And if for some reason they're not, I think it's a good opportunity to step back and go, why not? And particularly as a leader, to think about those you're leading, to think about how they lean into that. Because I, for instance, once led a team that just drained my energy. Almost every time I met with someone one-to-one, or we came together as a team, it was just this frustration and distraction and disappointment, and, you know, that's just one thing after another. And there was a bit of a reflection for the state that the business in question was in at the time, but also it was just a sort of reflection of how the team had developed. And so I think it's so important to find those reasons to be positive together and to focus on the positive, and particularly as a leader, to ask those who work for you to bring you energy. And I'm very deliberate and explicit about that, about saying that, you know, for people who report to me both individually and collectively, it's like, please bring me energy and I will help you build yours. But and of course I understand if there's times when you're low on that and we need to build it up, but it can't be just this like suck on your energy all the time. It just becomes too much.
Mood hoovers, that's the term that I've heard.
Mood hoovers, I'll remember that one.
Just on that then, what have been some of your happiest moments in leading the team?
Here's a bizarre one, because actually it was quite sad, but it was a moment of real sort of fulfillment as a team. Was I led a wonderful team during my time at Thomson Reuters, where we had been leading from across, you know, 3 different continents: Europe, South Asia, and North America. About 30 or so people in the team. We'd never met each other all in person, but we built this really strong bond through virtual means, particularly through WebEx, but also through telepresence and video conferencing and so on, and really had focused a lot on building that identity as a team and a really sort of strong sense of cohesion. And then the time came when Thomson Reuters split into 2, and our team was split into 2 as well. Half of us got allocated to one company, half to the other, and we had this sort of farewell sort of gig, so to speak, where we all came together for a telepresence. We created a sort of boasting book of all these sort of proud moments as of what we'd achieved as a team, and then I recited with somewhat hammy, but also, you know, with real meaning as well, the lyrics to the song "It's Hard to Say Goodbye," which comes from Dreamgirls the musical. Tells you something about me, somewhat camp and fun, but, you know, but it was a powerful moment. And actually, although tears were flowing because we knew how much we were going to miss each other, and 3 years later we still have a WhatsApp group going, it was also a moment of happiness because it really was a celebration of everything that we had done and learned and achieved together. And to this day, I think all of us, on occasion, will be messaging that WhatsApp group and go, wasn't that a great team? Wasn't it a great experience? So yeah. So in moments of sadness, you find happiness as well.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Nick. I think everybody will find something in there that's really useful and lots of takeaways. And obviously, this is our DEI bucket list. Is there anything on your bucket list that you'd like to tick off next?
Yes, to be less busy.
Fair enough. Do you want to go back to COVID times?
Yeah, something like that. So but there is, I was thinking about what would I add to the bucket list, and actually, in a sense, I'd rather take things off it, because I think all of us just are in this we're in a hamster wheel, and it is quite overwhelming at times. And so I think it's just finding ways to just step back and breathe.
Yeah.
Go for a walk. Look at the trees. Yeah. Make time for ourselves so that then we can be better for others and so on. So for me, my bucket list is maybe to take things off the bucket list.
Be a bit more mindful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much, Terri. Okay. See you.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.